Morning, fish keepers. Cam here from the fishroom.co.nz. We've done it. We've made it through to another Friday. Let us celebrate with coffee. It's really good. It's the first caffeine I've had in nearly 3 days. That is really, really good. So first of all, we've got a very special guest on today, which I'm really excited to be speaking to. But just quickly run through a couple of things. First off, apologies for having to shut the shop yesterday. My lack of responding to emails and messages and stuff like that. I've been fairly unwell for the last couple of days, and my brain has not really been where it needs to be. So I'm sorry about that. I'll try and get onto it this afternoon, this morning, as well as I can. So apologies to all for that. It just is one of those things, unfortunately. Secondly, of course, if you're in Nelson, we are open this weekend. We are open on Saturday mornings or Saturdays now from 10 until 3. See, my brain's still not quite working properly. So yeah, 10 till 3 we're open on Saturdays. So come on in, get your fishy fix, and away we go. So that is literally enough for me because I don't have anything else to talk about. So I don't really want to do anything else. So I'd like to bring on our guest, which is far more important. So we'll bring on John and we'll bring on Rebecca.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. How are you doing?
Well, afternoon or evening.
Thank you very much for joining us. It's much appreciated.
It's good to be here. Yeah.
So you've obviously been on a few of our lives. You've been in the comments with us, and you've got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Pleco and other various fish and stuff like that. So first, I'd just like to know what got you into this great hobby of keeping fish.
So I started keeping fish just because, like, I've always liked animals and pets and stuff like that, and it was like my first individual animal or pet that I kept. And my first one was actually a Pistogramma cacatoides, which is a dwarf cockatoo cichlid. So it's not probably the most usual that people keep as their first pet, but that was mine. And it's because I saw, I don't know if they stock it in New Zealand or in the UK, they don't stock it much anymore. But Sarah, they had these like leaflets, and they showed like ideal biotopes. Mm-hmm. And I saw this fish, and I was like, I want that, and I want everything in this tank. So I also kept corridor stir-by with them eventually, and the dwarf butterfly cichlid. So that's the Microgeophagus ramrezi, or the ram cichlids now.
Yep.
And that's what really got me hooked. And I used to write lists of fish I wanted. And because I always wanted to work with animals, I was like, what jobs could I do with animals other than vet jobs? And zoology and then ichthyology occurred later on, just because it's finding what actually working with fish is in the scientific context.
Yeah.
So are you an ichthyologist?
Yeah, so that's what I've always wanted to be. And I would say because I study more or less exclusively fishes, yes. But then I kind of studied the evolution. So I'm more of an evolutionary biologist that studies my theories on fish.
Cool.
Which is what science is nowadays. No one studies particularly like one group of animals. They study a theory and use one group of animals or plants to test it on.
Ah, okay.
Hence why you don't find many people that know a lot about one taxa so much, I guess.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So from my understanding, from when I've sort of vaguely spoken to you, watching your videos and stuff like that, and had you on with us in the chat, L number plecos are your jam, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. So how long have you been interested in L numbers for, and what kind of built that love up?
So I started looking into, catfishes in general, because I started my undergrad and so my bachelor's degree, so the first university degree, and I was like, I either want to study the reproductive physiology of fishes because I've been interested in sort of the abnormalities or where fishes differ from a lot of different other animals and plants, or studying sort of the evolution, taxonomy. And I thought taxonomy would be something I wouldn't get bored of, because when you're studying anything physiology or something like that, you're sat there in the lab and you're just pipetting things around. And with taxonomy, I deal with so many different specimens and stuff like that, and evolutionary biology as well. So I was like, I'm going to choose that. And then I was like, what group of animals would be most interesting, or what group of fishes would be most interesting? And I was like, it's either loaches or catfish.
Yeah.
And I was like, catfish seem a bit more diverse. So I did my undergrad, like choosing catfish is where I could. So I did my undergraduate project actually in the family that contains corridors, because I was like, I want to diverge a little bit out of Loricariidae. And I realised I have no idea about corridors and I'm not very good at them. So I was like, I'll keep with what I know. So I did 2 master's projects on the Loricariidae, so the Plecos. And they're just so diverse. And I think sometimes it's just finding something that you understand, that you also have an interest in, and that takes time. Especially in the hobby, there's so many different groups of fishes to keep and understand.
I think once you find something that you've got an interest in, everything else just comes naturally.
Yes.
Whereas if you're trying to focus in on something that you've not got 100% passion for, it's a lot harder. Whereas if you can turn it into something that most fish keepers will do to some extent, where you jump down that rabbit hole when you're fascinated with a new species, if you can turn that into everything for yourself, then you're laughing.
Yeah, rabbit holes are brilliant, I think, as well. Discus have been one of mine. There's not much on them, and they're just fascinating because Loricariidae, Plecos, I look mostly at body shapes. They're quite obvious, the differences, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, whereas people say cichlids have all this diversity, I think not many of them do. But like discus, they're interested in another aspect of like the genetics. I find is quite interesting, and how there's almost this sweep across South America of like a gradual change with a few variations. But yeah.
I think it's amazing that when there's 2 fish and they almost look identical, and you find it in all groups of fish, and it's not until you go to the molecular level, and that's where you start seeing differences. Obviously, I've not done that, but I've had conversations with people that have, and it really blows my mind that you've got to dig so deep into the making of a fish to identify if it's a new species or a strain or a slight difference of an existing species. So
even like, because I do CT scanning a lot, it's quite a new technique for my sort of field. So looking at the skeletal details, it shows like, because you're also with specimens, I deal with a lot of specimens in alcohol, my own personal ones, and in museums. Once you ignore colour, you see other aspects of how different species can be, whether it's some sort of like their shape is slightly different, or individual bones for CT scanning. So almost like a CT scanning, like you do with people, you also do with specimens. I work a lot with paleontologists in that aspect, because a lot of them put fossils underneath CT scanners. So I just put recently dead things.
Can you explain the process of the CT scanning a little bit more, and what you're doing when you're looking for doing them?
So generally it's some sort of preserved specimen. So usually in alcohol, they can be a bit more fresh than that, but I've only dealt with in alcohol. So they're you fix them in what's known as formalin. It does have loads of like health and safety, because that's a carcinogen, and then you put in store for long term after a period of time in ethanol or methanol, and then to place in the CT scan, it's quite simple really. It's just you basically put it in a jar or plastic container, because a CT scanner is very similar to an X-ray. I mean, you do use X-rays to sort of navigate it. So it does come with radiation risk, but it just shows the skeletal detail, and sometimes to a degree soft tissue. So it's just putting it in, and shows you the different bones and sometimes tissues, so organs. It's where you don't need to dissect a specimen, you don't need to break it down, you don't need to destroy it, because I deal with historical specimens. A lot of them might be types, so they might be the individual that whole species is based on, or they might be one of the few individuals left of that species or left preserved. So there's one that I've never worked with, but I've handled, and this is only one of 9 specimens left in the world, and there's no live ones left.
Wow.
So you don't want to dissect that for the scanner.
No,
To put it in the scanner. So it's just like an X-ray, really, and then you put on in the computer, and you can see the whole. You can see not just the soft tissues, but also skeletal details. Depends on the resolution. And then I just mostly look at jaws. I've previously looked at what's known as like the so it's almost like the sternum and the pelvis of fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at that as well, because the Loricariidae, they're quite different, I think, between all the different species. And mostly I've worked in Ancistrus, which is the bristle noses. And before that, at the same time, Lassi Ancistrus, which is another similar one, but you don't see so much in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
They, like Ancistrus, the bristle noses, they have those beautiful tentacles. Lassi Ancistrus tends to be a lot more like quite a few others in the spines on the head. So that's the CT scanning. It's just almost like dissecting, but without damaging anything. It's quite new. Not many countries or even museums or places have it, just because it's quite pricey and it's a big machine. Not quite like the ones people use, though.
How long has it been in this field then? How long?
I don't know. I would say probably 20 years, maybe, or more. Natural History Museum has one. My university has one. I think Southampton, which my undergrad was at, probably has one, because they do a lot of paleontology. It's a bit difficult to gauge, because some unis probably have it for their medicine degrees and their veterinary degrees. Obviously, although veterinary is quite restricted in the UK, which universities have it. And you probably don't want to use a veterinary one on specimens, because some of my fish are like that big. Oh, there's the camera. Like tiny. And then you've got ones like that big, but vets are using it for much bigger animals, and doctors are using it for even bigger.
Yeah.
So
did you use it for the elephant skull that you had?
No, that's when you for like PhDs and usually postgrads, you so usually in the UK you get funded, and then you might do part of it as you might get a job as like teaching, and in the teaching labs at my uni, I don't think my undergrad had this, but this uni has so many different specimens. They got all sorts of fishes. They've got an echidna, like a baby echidna. They've got platypus, all sorts, just in jars, stuffed everywhere across the teaching labs, in the basement. And the elephant skull is one of them. But I don't know what they use it for yet. But I'm meant to be helping out with, so it's teaching undergrads mostly, but also master students.
Okay.
But I'm on to teach or help out with a lab on mammalian skulls. So I guess it will go on to, I don't know.
Time will tell. Do you ever do the dyeing of the specimens? I can't remember the name of that.
Oh, like diaphanate? No. I want to, but it has so many different chemicals involved. And like PPE, just protective equipment, that I'm a bit like, I should learn it, and there's different techniques I should probably learn. I've not needed to. I've seen some specimens, but
I was talking to Ivan McColgie about when he was doing it and how he learned to do it. And it's something that he's done for quite a while, but it's very much been he stumbled across it one day, and he got, somebody just says they'll teach him how to do it, and it was almost like a garden shed hobby at one point for him, I think. But yeah, it's really interesting.
I think it still is a hobby. I'm not sure. I've seen it once at Natural History Museum, but I've not seen it in many use it. I don't know whether it just is difficult to apply certain, because for a lot of scientific techniques you have to be able to quantify things, and it's probably not that easy to quantify. I don't know, but it does look useful because other techniques are so expensive. And
I think if you're looking for something specifically within the anatomy, and being able to highlight that specific area would be quite a helpful thing.
Yeah, you can do that with CT scanning. The programs allow you to, it takes a long time because you have to select each individual area. You can almost, it's what's called segmentation, which the name is self-explanatory, but you can highlight one individual bone. So I did it with the jaws on somewhere, because a lot of Loricariidae, like, because my project was on the Ancistrus, my master's project, I mostly dealt with specimens that Ancistrus, I grab this fish, Ancistrus mostly, so here where there's all that plating, this is totally dried and mummified, so they don't have that. It's sort of, there's a few like dermal plates of bone there, and then it just stops and it's soft. But because when I'm looking at the jaws, it kind of folds over and you miss parts of the jaws. So you have to almost segment it out on the computer. But then where I'm going to deal with more species, I'm going to have to probably segment or take them all out on the computer.
I love how you just casually pick up a dried out.
Yeah. This is the only one I've got dried. I'd like more, but they need to be big, otherwise they get damaged. But this is just Pteroplectes josemanus, or what's it, gold spot L002, I think. I've had this for ages. And I would bring it to my desk at uni, but I don't want people to freak out. But I was carrying around a bag of dead fish today because to and from the CT scanner, I was like, oh, I'll just put them in a bag with dried fish. Well, were in alcohol. But,
What fascinates you about plecos in particular that's made you want to put so much time and effort into it? Sorry, my brain's still not doing its thing properly.
No, it's fine. The diversity, so there's about, I think every year, I have to check so often, but there's 1,040 species now, which is only one family, and they're restricted to South America, apart from obviously the invasives, which are only like one genus, and maybe hypostomus as well. But it's just the diversity and how different many of them are. Even the fact that, yes, everyone says plecos, but then plecos is hit and miss on what people apply to being pleco. And like you look at Loricariidae, which is one of the other subfamilies, so that's your like twig plecos, or sorry, twig catfish, whiptails. They don't look anything similar, but they are in that same family. And then you've got ones that are more distantly related that look more like the typical subfamily hypostomae. And then you've got the little dwarf ones like ottos and Rhinootocinclus, which are all very sweet, but they're all the same family, but they're so diverse. And they're the largest, I think they are the largest group of catfishes, which is itself a massive group of fishes. There are bigger families than plecos. There's I think it's Cichlidae, definitely, so cichlids, but they all look the same to me. Because most of them are going to be those Rift Valley cichlids. I think there's like 1,000 or more just in one lake. And then there's the Cyprinidae, which is I think going to be like barbs and stuff, and they all look pretty much the same to me anyway.
But when you say they look the same, do you mean once you get them under a microscope or into a CT
no.
scan?
This is just my vague opinions on like they're similar sort of body plan. Like with cichlids, you've got that, you know, like you see a cichlid and they've got that very traditional body shape, with the exceptions of angelfish and discus, and obviously like severums. But other than that, they all look pretty much similar. Sorry?
Yeah. So they look pretty much like a fish, like a traditional fish shape,
Whereas Loricariidae are a bit more diverse, and some like look completely different. Half of them we don't see in the trade. Like I've seen some in the museum which look totally unusual. There's one, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but it's so where some have those odontos, those bristles on the top of their head, on the side of their head, this just has these massive ones on the top. That I don't know if it's extinct in the wild, but it's a bit more difficult to track. And there's so many, the diversity of ancistrus I think is amazing anyway. And to someone that doesn't see fish, you show them a photo of ancistrus and they're like, what is that? Because they are just so unusual. And even their mouths, I get questions on when I'm CT scanning them, like people are like, what's that? And where a lot of people ask, because a lot of people who deal with CT scanning anyway are paleontologists, they say how similar they look to placoderms, which is the Dunkleostomus, which is this big prehistoric, long extinct fish that is just full of that plating, and it's something different anyway.
Yeah, when you consider autocinclus, or obviously the tiny suckermouth, and compare it under the microscope on a skeletal level with like one of the larger ones, how similar are they structure-wise?
I've not put autocinclus under a microscope, but they have that plating. It's just really difficult to see.
Right.
They have the hair or the spines, the odontodes, and those external teeth covering the body the same. Hence why they catch in nets. You can put them in the net, and especially certain fine nets, they're stuck already, which is pretty much the same. Their body shape, their body plan is quite similar. Their mouth, I'm not entirely sure, because I need to study it further, because they are, I think, algivores or whatever, but how they feed on it is yet to be known.
Okay.
While you've been studying, is there anything that you've discovered that's kind of really blowing your mind that you didn't sort of realize was going to be like that, or something along those lines?
So I did phylogeny, or so a family tree of ancistrus. That's one of my favorite ones because no one's done that yet. And obviously, so mine was only morphology, which when looking at like family trees of animals, plants, morphology is only like, it's not really looked up as highly as others, as like using genetics. But I did identify like the how different species place within that ancistrus, within the genus. Other than that, I don't know. I just like looking at the morphology and comparing, especially where some things. So a lot of the stuff I do is looking at papers, and that's where I see the biggest, because I don't know. I've done a lot of like primary research, and one of my particular ones was like doing looking at diets, and that's where it started my interest in fish diets. And when you actually read about fish diets, it's nothing like what the hobby says, or what certain resources say, and that makes you question everything. So particularly now I'm having to compare the data from the fishes to what their diet is. I try and look for diet records of one species and there's nothing. I look for the whole genus, there's nothing, or it's entirely different. So like Hypancistris, I wanted to put them down as carnivores because everyone says they're carnivores, but there's nothing. They eat algae and detritus in the wild.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I can't put them down as carnivores. It's not right to do that because I'm just not using the right sources. And there's other things, like obviously the wood eaters, that drives me nuts because there's plenty of papers on that. It's one of the most detailed groups of fishes' diets that.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think?
I think it's because. Oh, sorry, were you?
No, it's okay.
I think it's because there's not actually many things or animals that eat plants, and it's quite a unique sort of diet source. So everyone's like, why are they eating wood? This is something different. But then when they actually like analyze it, they're not eating wood. They're eating they're digesting the same things as quite a lot of other things. They just find it in another source. But then because it becomes, I think, like almost where one source says one thing, then another copies it, changes it slightly, and it goes on and on. And then eventually you get one source that is meant to be like knows it all, and everything copies that, and it just gets totally lost. Because some things I can't even find records for or like information for, like Picoltia. I've got a specimen that I've CT scanned. I've got the jaws. I can't find any records of what they eat in the wild, and I'm need to spend more time. But I spent a few hours and I can't find anything. So Picoltia is like wormline pleco, the false clown pleco, so that's bittita.
134s.
Yeah. There's a lot of them, but it's just there's nothing on their diets, and I'm like, where are people getting it from? But they got such similar like teeth and jaws to Hypancistris that I'm kind of going along. I'll keep with what Hypancistris feed on, which is detritus algae. They do have seeds in their gut. Whether they can process the seeds, I don't know, or if they have any functional benefit, I kind of doubt, because animals eat all sorts of rubbish and doesn't mean they're digesting it.
Yeah.
Hence why most of the records of those wood eaters is they have wood in their gut, doesn't mean they're digesting it.
Yeah. You could just be rasping on the wood in order to get what's inside the wood or beneath the wood, and it's just a byproduct, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of the major studies, the 2013 study, I think it is actually, Nathan Lujan and others, that said that potentially the Panax are built for going, or the Panac they use, which was Panac bathyphyllus, you don't often see it. It's the smaller species, I think. And that's evolved for going deep inside the wood. They never used the larger species of Panac. The others they used was Panaculus, which is the little ones like the flash, the mustard spot, the really nice ones that are a little bit more easier to keep and better size. They go more at surface level, and even in captivity you can see it, where the clown pleco, the little macaques and relatives of that, they only seem to sort of go on the surface level. So maybe they're eating the ones not too far down, the microbes there. And then the flash, the mustard spot, nocturnus and stuff like that are going a lot deeper down.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's going to be research potentially further down that route because it's just funding.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to pay to find, like, there's not going to be that thousands of pounds of funding to find out what Panacus eats compared to Panac any further than that. I don't think. It's all funding anyway.
Yeah. I think as well, because... Sorry, Cam?
Just like so much research is, it's all where the funding is to whether it can be discovered or not. Yeah. Yeah, and Plex aren't winning it, I guess, because, well, in the UK, my field, and I guess related fields where Loricariidae supply or Plex supply is going to be the African cichlid, where they are popular, and marine fishes. Marine fishes always win. But because universities have whole departments for marine biology, and we fit in just with everyone else in freshwater. Touching back on what you were saying about the food and what sort of talked about in the industry and in the hobby to what you've kind of discovered, do you want to expand a little bit on that to say like commercial foods that are available to what's actually kind of probably more realistic to what should be being fed?
Okay, so it's not the best studied. So when we're looking at fish foods, we generally, in general, most fish foods and most research is based on aquaculture, which is developing and producing foods for, or studying what makes the best food for fishes that you're going to eat or you're going to sell on. They're not long-term diets. So you want efficiency, you want it to grow quickly for the least amount of money. So it's got to be something cheap. You're not thinking about how this fish is going to look in 5 years' time. You're not probably even going to look in 1 year's time. You want it out as quickly as possible. So it's not looking at what these fishes eat in the wild. It's just looking at, not even like looking at how organs develop. Maybe for the reproductive individuals, you want to look at their fecundity, so how many offspring they're producing and the quality of it. But that's what most of the science is on. And when you look at aquaculture diets, and it's even been recognised in a few papers, that they are exactly the same as what a lot of the hobby feeds. And there's two different aims. We're not keeping fish to grow as big as possible and then just chuck them out. And I understand for a lot of stores, it's really expensive feeding fish and it adds up all the time. So I understand their aim. So I don't really want to like lecture stores about what they should feed their fish. But I think as a hobbyist, you're keeping your fish for as long as possible and as healthy as possible. There are possible, there's a paper that also referenced other papers. I probably need to actually go down the rabbit hole of reading further, but linking certain diets to cancer in fishes, fecundity, so reduced, whether it's females not producing as many eggs or as healthy, the eggs not developing it properly, or males with lower sperm counts. But also just general health of the fish. Like longevity, a lot of fishes don't probably live as long as they should in captivity. And freshwater gets a bad sort of reputation for being short-lived fish, as in bad, not like marine, a lot of people think, oh, they should live longer. Freshwater, it's like they should only live a few years. And a lot of these fish can live a lot longer. So I found a paper. I have no idea how reliable. I don't know if I'll be able to find it again because I go through too many papers a day. I print up a few. But I think it was aimed at Loricariidae or Plecos, and it was listing a minimum age of like 30 for most species. And I do know of Pterophyctes, so common Plecos, at 30, and there is a record of a Panac at 80. But the sky's the limit of these fish, because there is fish that are 25 plus and not on the best diet, I think anyway. But a lot of people don't give credit to freshwater fishes for living that long or having well, when fishes die, a lot of people don't just think about maybe I should improve in this aspect. And I think diet's one of the key things. We look at it with all other animals, like dogs, there's been massive focus on different aspects of diet, and there's so much debate on it. And I think that's great to see debate, because people are questioning what they thought was true. Whether they then learn actually they were wrong or they were right. But there's just not enough, like, it's just so different to what the fishes that eat in the wild is so different to what they do in captivity. And when we look at diet, a lot of, so the actual sort of science of sort of my aspect of it, which is morphology and related to that, fishes are very well adapted to certain diets, whether that's their jaw morphology. And you can look at it without other animals. When you look at certain, like mammals, you can see whether they feed on one diet or another. Like, I've got too many dead things. So this is a pig. It's got sort of, it's an omnivore. It's got things to grind. It's got teeth to probably like grab. I don't know. I'm not a mammal scientist, but it's got a mixture of different teeth. Then we compare. I'm not sure. So I was thinking this was fox, and I was thinking it was dog. You got loads of sort of sharp teeth that are meant to sort of break down some more carnivorous prey. But fishes are the same. They have very precise, well-adapted anatomy and jaws to feed on certain diets. So with Loricariidae particularly, you'll have many numerous teeth. So loads of teeth and sort of wide plates that those teeth are on for herbivorous species. And the more herbivorous, or when they feed on like flat surfaces, they tend to have, I think, those wider plates. So rocks generally. So you see it in barren citrus. So that's gold nugget, the magnum, the mango. Also ketostone, which is the rubber nose. Bulldog, Pleco. Bulldog also covers another one. But they're ones feeding on that flat surface. Whether they're feeding on the same thing, I would say maybe not entirely, because a lot of it's at that microbial level.
Which one is it? Is that the hook? Like the hook part? What species is it that has like a hook part in their jaw for holding on in really strong currents? I remember at a catfish study group talk, they were discussing the different shapes of the mouth. I can't remember, it was too long ago now, but there was one that grabs on, and it was designed different from the rest of them, and it had like a hook at the back in order
so there's Bentley serosa, which is one of the can-dos. That's the parasitic one. And that uses what is equivalent in a Loricariidae. So there, it will hook onto its prey through there and latch on, and then to the blood supply. They're related, so they're in the same sub-order or superfamily. So they're actually really closely related, and they do have a lot of similar anatomy. Also to Corydoras as well.
Really?
I think they might be more closely related to Corydoras and that lot than they are to Loricariidae.
Wow.
Just had a question off the floor. Is it good to fast your fish every now and then, or what's your opinion on that?
I think it depends on the fish. Some fish will feed frequently, some fish won't. So grazers, I'd feed a lot. I feed my discus, my Loricariidae daily, twice a day. Seasonally, generally, because my Loricariidae particularly, where it's more that tank, they're larger, they need a lot more food and a lot more frequently. The big female only eats one variety of courgette because I don't want to feed Rapashi twice a day. I don't have the largest tanks. I should get larger, but I'm in rented accommodation and that's difficult. But she only eats one variety of courgette, and it's not one you can buy in the shops. So I have to wait every summer for my dad's allotment to grow it. And then she'll eat that. She won't eat it. She's getting a lot better, but I've tried different things as like a lower quality diet just to keep something through through the gut, because I treat her a bit like a rabbit, where you have to have something constantly through the gut of rabbits or they go into stasis. And it's something I've been trialing. I won't know if I've ever succeeded with it, because it's one of those long-term things.
Yeah.
And whether they ever breed, I don't know.
Just touching back on, you're saying how freshwater species have the tendency, or it's kind of in the mind of everyone, they don't last all that long, and you're saying that feeding's important. What other things do you think are important to fish that kind of make their lifespan shorter, which we could, as a hobbyist, do better to improve their lifespan?
One of the things is medication I don't know about, but a lot of them, most people don't know the side effects of medication. So I tend not to medicate unless I think there's no way I'm going to get around this.
Yeah.
I will worm fishes and do the worming in a week later, just to hit one generation and then hopefully knock it out. But then worms potentially have a benefit. There's a lot of so there's the side effects in general. A lot of them are carcinogens, so not just affecting the fishes but also you. So I don't know whether also you're putting your hands in that water, and water changing might remove it, but it will take over time. And the fishes are in that constantly, particularly formalin. I know there was something, because obviously with my jars of fishes, they're originally preserved in formalin. You have to wear a certain respirator, gloves to handle it. But with the aquarium trays, I've never seen anyone treat for white spot with gloves or with a respirator. So that always got me, like, the fishes are also constantly in that. So maybe that might, a lot of tumours and cancers you can't see. And in fishes, you won't be able to see them. Not many people actually dissect into it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't treat. And I definitely wouldn't go entirely like looking down the sort of holistic route. So looking down just salts or melifix and pemifix, I don't recommend anyway. But but
should we go a commercial break, Cam?
What's that, sorry?
We'll go to a commercial break here. As just screens. I'm only joking.
But I think definitely treatments, and also thinking that fishes, like people, have their own ecosystem on their skin and in their gut. Antibiotics are probably the worst thing you can do. We have restrictions in the UK. People get around it. I wish they wouldn't, because the actual repercussions of antibiotic resistance are a lot. And I don't know, I think Australia has restrictions. I don't know about New Zealand.
Yeah, we're pretty restricted on most things here.
Yeah, so it's just not worth doing. And a lot of the stuff I think the immune system can deal with, especially with a healthy fish, or if you make an attempt. Other than that, I think the biggest thing for fishes in general is they aren't the easiest animal to keep. Now, I've worked with a lot of animals. I used to be really big into keeping or working with horses. Horses, they're hard work, but the knowledge and sort of the research doesn't compare. Reptiles, there's no other animal that compares to fishes. And freshwater, I think they have not just the fact that they're sort of treated as the easier pet, but also they're treated as like if they die, that's old age. And I've seen it so frequently, like 5-year-old fish that could live to 30 plus, they're not even reproductive at that age. It's treated like old age when they die.
Yeah, well, as a shop owner, I get a lot of people coming in saying, we've had this fish for 3 years. It's getting pretty old. It's died. It must have been old age. And in my mind, I question that significantly.
Yeah, because the fish should live longer than that. Oh,
yeah. Ooh,
Rebecca,
what's going on? She's frozen in time.
Oh, sorry, it's my Wi-Fi goes down.
We're back. You're back.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi cuts out a lot.
So you mentioned before that worms can have a benefit within fish.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because I would assume, and I'm probably generalizing, that the majority of the hobbyists say worms inside bad, let's get rid of them. So can you expand on that?
So it's only sort of preliminary research, but parasites in general, there's sort of a level which is normal. Everything has parasites, whether it's a bacterial, protozoan, fungal, worms. But then there's obviously the level that's too much, and that hints that something else is wrong. Maybe it could be that the animal is in a reproductive phase that is costly. It's costing a lot on their physiology. And then the other thing with worms is there could be an sort of they could help protect against other parasites, other diseases. They could potentially help with digestion was another thing. Okay. And it's only sort of vague research, but I think it's something we've seen with gut biota, so microbes in the gut, where they do have that benefit that hasn't actually been, people don't look into. Especially with sort of prebiotics over probiotics, thinking about what you're feeding, whether it helps with the bacteria that are actually good rather than introducing any others. So that also comes into natural diets, that everything has its own natural gut microbes that they've had from the wild. They might have from their parents, they might have from what they eat. And then feeding a more natural diet or what they feed on in the wild will help encourage that. And also they digest it even better.
Do you know, like, I'm thinking there is some foods on the market with probiotics and prebiotics, all that kind of stuff added to it. Do you know if that research is done from a human base or from a fish base for it to be beneficial?
I don't know. I did see a PhD project or PhD student actually studying, I think it was probiotics on salmon.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't know how it worked because I know with humans there's the aspect of it's got to go through the stomach, which will kill a lot of microbes anyway. Whereas with fish, I'd assume there's some sort of, because otherwise they'd be getting ill all the time from whatever they eat, whereas they don't, so maybe there's something else to it.
Yeah, very cool. You often share a lot of sort of photos and things that you come across and studies and stuff like that. What's the strangest thing that you've sort of found in your travels? So
the strangest thing, parasites and stuff like that, because they freak me out. I don't want anything to do with them, but they always I get photos of all sorts of them. Dermocystidium is fascinating. I can't remember what it was meant to be, some sort of worm parasite, and then they moved it to another group. But Dermocystidium, you see quite often, it looks like an actual parasitic worm, and people are like, oh my God, what's this? Because it looks like it comes in all sorts of shapes and forms, and it's in a little cyst. You prod it, it won't move. I think it was meant to be a fungi at one point. It's not anymore.
Yeah.
But it just looks like this worm, and the fish's immune system deals with it, but it's totally freaky. That's one I've seen on quite a few different wild fish in different forms. Cysts is quite common. Funky fish. My favourite has to be, oh blimey, It's called the grease fish on planet Catfish.
Grease fish.
Just typing in.
I'll put a
I
link in the chat.
do know, but I always forget it. I think it's grease fish. Yeah. Rhizomichthys, so that's one at the Natural History Museum I mentioned before. It's extinct in the wild, 9 specimens left in the world, but it's totally unusual. It's just got those sort of, it's got like, well, it's fat rolls, but it's not. It's just lipid and no one knows what it does, why they have it. They're found in Colombia in the deep lake, I think. And that's just one of my favourite specimens because there's nothing like it, because there's going to be nothing else like it, because I assume they are never going to be found again. But they're a Trichomycidae, which is the same as that's Vandellia, which is the parasitic catfish. They're a bit like the catfish version of weather loaches, most of them. There's quite a few parasitic ones. Some only feed on scales, some only feed on blood. But most, I assume, are a lot like weather loaches. And there's a few, I think even blind ones that only live in caves.
Yeah. When you finish your studies, what are you sort of planning to do with your qualifications? Is there a master plan for you when you're done, or are you just fascinated in studying and going to try and tick off another interest that you want to research into?
So I'd like to do lecturing or research. I'd have to do a postdoc between that, which is like, so you do a PhD, which is a doctorate, and then after that it's sort of like this, so a temporary job that you do between other things. So you might go totally down the academic route, so that's either teaching, lecturing, or research. Lecturing it's quite different depending where you live. In the UK, it's split research and split teaching. And I'd either like that or just full-on research. There is industry, but industry for me would be either working, I don't know. There's nothing like, there's the aquarium industry, I guess, but I don't know what I could help them with, really, or what I could do for that, because especially it would be certain companies that they would want more someone interested in, or who'd worked in aquaculture, whereas I'm more interested in evolution. I like to go down rabbit holes rather than looking at physiology entirely.
Have you ever got out onto the field?
No.
No. Do you have plans to?
Yes, I want to go to Peru, most likely, because it seems like a lot easier to go to. There's a lot of Ancistrus out there, and I really want to solve the problem that is Ancistrus, because, like, people might have seen when people post a photo, what is this Ancistrus? And I'm like, I cannot reliably give an answer unless it's something very distinctive, because this genus is such a mess. It's so popular, but it's a mess.
Yeah.
Like, even the common bristlenose, we don't know what species it is. We know it's not Ancistrus serosus. We know it's not the Trinidad species. It's nothing. We don't know what it is, but Ancistrus in general, the wild ones, it's not being worked on. And that would be quite fun, I think, just to work on the Peruvian species at least, and then make an effort further on.
Well, the research centre in Iquitos, they're doing another raffle this year for a free 2-week trip. So get yourself a ticket.
Yeah, Peru's definitely, it's got a lot. And the discus are amazing. They're my favourite, the Peruvian discus.
Yeah, they're stunning.
Why do you think there's so much mess in the Ancistrus group as a whole?
I think it's because there's too many and it got out of hand. Because I think there's about 50 species. Sorry?
So they weren't documented well enough to start with?
Yeah, there's not great. It's kind of, some of them are just like fish with tentacles, spots on some of them. It literally, I've printed out a few because I'm trying to work through the genus a little bit, but some of them are just vague. A lot of them just aren't described at all. So most of the ones in the trade, I think, there's some that are distinctive enough, like ranunculus, the true medusa, the blue medusa, which is a macroophthalmos, they're distinctive enough. Ancestral which is the starlight, I'm not sure about, because the original description says 8 to 9 soft dorsal rays. Every one I've seen has 9.
Yeah.
It's one of those that...
Would that make you think that the ones that have got 8 are a different species entirely?
Potentially. And there's also what's known as Ancistrus hoplogenes, which for some reason they included Ancistrus punctatus into it. Ancistrus hoplogenes should get to about that big. Ancistrus punctatus gets to about that big. So it's like, and they look quite different. So it kind of makes it like every spotted Ancistrus that isn't distinctive, might as well just chuck it in. And it gets confused with the L numbers as well, because L numbers have their own issues as a system, I think. And a lot of scientists don't use it.
Oh, really?
Right.
So it's not really scientific at all. Like, you'll see people mention L200. L200 describes 2 different species. We now know they're sister species, but originally they were 2 different genera. So that's Abanthus dermatoides, which is the hyphen, and then the normals, Hemiancistrus subvirdis, and they've got the same number, and they do look pretty much the same, which is quite unhelpful that they've got the same number. And then you've got Abanthus xanthellus, the gold nugget, which has 4 L numbers and 1 LDA number, and as adults they all look the same, which for me, I think it's just, they all look the same in the end.
What's the difference between the L and the LDA numbers?
LDA is just, so L numbers was made by DATS magazine, or still is made because they're still publishing. They're most in German. So they, as far as I know, they don't really publish like descriptions. So like scientific descriptions are very detailed. So you have like scientific paper, but in a weirder format, like an introduction, like say, this is the topic. Then you have all the formalities of what it is, the diagnosis. So this is this species and how it looks different from others. And then you've got the description, so all the details on the species. But the L numbers, like almost like aquarium pages in a way, they just say, I guess, this is what it looks like, but it's not detailed enough. And it doesn't need to be. It is only a sort of a hobby thing.
Yeah.
But it's not scientific. And then LDA is another magazine. I don't know which. I don't think they're still running. But I don't know. It's a bit like C Numbers, which was that, is DATS magazine, and CW Numbers, which is Corridor as well, in Fuller.
I suppose it shouldn't blow my mind, but it blows my mind that these reference numbers and letters that we commonly use in the hobby have both just come from separate magazines wanting to title something.
Yeah.
Well, I guess things have got to start
as well.
But, yeah.
You can look at how common names change. Like the common bristlenose has so many different variant names. And then how common names change in general. Like I worked in the aquarium trade and I like to stick to my common names, and I enjoy it when people get worked up on common names being different from what they thought they knew, like Bala shark. I prefer that to silver shark.
Yeah.
And I will use Bala shark. People look at me like I'm crazy.
I've always been silver shark.
And copper tetra rather than silver tips. And dwarf butterfly cichlid, I think, sounds way better than ram cichlid, because ram cichlid's the scientific name is Microgeophagus, was Apistogramma ramrezi, which is named after someone. And then it became ram cichlid. It's like they lobbed someone's name in half. And it's not even, it doesn't flow as well. So I think dwarf butterfly cichlid describes how they appear a lot nicer. And I did try pushing that, but it didn't take.
Do you know where German ram cichlid came from then? Where they added the German part?
So I think it's a lineage, a bit like you get certain lineages of other animals and also of plants. So certain breeders will have a name, and that's where it originated from. So, but the problem is that it caught on, and I guess that they were the nicer fishes or the more hardy fishes, the more colourful fishes. I don't know, but that name has caught on, and a lot of the ones that are called German rams are not German rams, probably in lineage at all. They're more accurately should be called Asian rams, but they're not, I guess. And also I've seen European rams, and they're not even, most aren't even bred in Europe anymore, certainly not in Germany. And they look entirely different now anyway.
Probably a little bit similar to the polysperma Rosenvig, the sunset polysperma that was created in one place, and they've just been pushed around the world, and they're not even really a variant of it, but they sort of are at the same time.
Yeah.
Blue phantoms and green phantoms. There's a lot of debate whether they're the same fish, whether they are same fish that feed on different things, different catch points in a very similar part of the riverway. What's your thoughts on those particular fish?
So I was thinking they were potentially a ring species. So a ring species is like one that you get. So because species is nature doesn't follow definitions. At one point you get one animal, and at another point you get the other, and they're two different species. But as you get closer, they get more similar, and in the middle they can interbreed.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be tempted to say they are the same species, and I would inquire further. Maybe there is a slight size difference, but then I'm not sure, because I kept a large Banzicius dermatoides, which is another sister species. It's got different genus just because of misnaming, and no one's going to correct it right now. And that got a lot larger than the greens are meant to be. So it makes me wonder whether they're just not recorded as getting as large as the blues. The blues are found further north up the river, I think it is. So they're up a waterfall compared to the greens, I think it is. And the greens do get darker as they get closer to the blues. So I'd be inclined to say two populations of the same species right now that might be on the verge of becoming a new one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But they are interesting, and it would be nice to sort of analyze the genetics of the blues, because I don't think they've actually been looked at. The greens have been, both of them.
Yeah.
Or even looking at their morphology, the skeletons.
On my very, very basic thought pattern, I always thought, because they're caught in different, it could be the same fish caught in different areas of the same riverway, different food sources providing a different color pigment slightly to the other one. That was always my thought. I have not looked any deeper than that thought, so I could be totally wrong, and I probably am totally wrong, but I always thought that might be a logical thing and a very basic point to work from.
They seem to hold their colour in captivity, I'd say, which means that probably isn't what they're eating entirely, but could be something else about that habitat. And I don't think there's too many details on the blues habitat compared to the greens. It's not one I've looked into entirely, just, I don't know. But they are one that's very interesting, especially that group. They tend to, looking at them and reading about them, they're actually, I would say they mature quite early compared to others. but they're a lot more difficult to grow. The greens and the blues are a lot more easier than some other relatives, but they are a bit more niche.
Have you spawned any plecos yourself?
So I've bred, when I worked in the aquarium trade, I bred quite a few different hypensistrus. So I bred the L66. These were quite an old pair, so they might have been L333. They look nothing like what most people keep. These ones might have been 10 years or older. Also, the Mega Clown is at 340, 360, or maybe 260. I bred those. I don't keep track because I'm not too into breeding the fishes myself. The balance is just a project because no one's bred them and I just like them anyway. They're a bit of a challenge to keep, and they got awful lot of personality or more anger problems. But what else? The L199, which is the Delbrita, which a lot of hypensistrus are really easy to breed, to be honest. It's just time and high temperatures. And they weren't fed the best diet.
Did you say they aren't easy to breed, or they are easy to breed?
Oh.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the amount of people that are breeding hypensistrus zebra, and yes, they're not, I actually think they're quite common, but the amount of people that are breeding them, I think says a lot compared to others. And there's other species that are more popular or more easier or equal to obtain, but they're not bred even in half the amount of numbers. Like the phantoms, I think it's single-digit number of people have actually bred them.
Yeah.
And then the barren sisters, so gold nugget, I think is 3 people, maybe. And the one I saw recently, they were quite stunted. So in the wild, you see photos of ones about that big, and these were like that. But they were about 7 years old, I think.
You mentioned before time. How important do you think time is when it comes to reproducing L-number fish?
I think it's a patience game. They're not as prolific as like cichlids. They do it half of adult size. Like discus, you can breed at they could be a quarter of adult size and they still spawn. And many other cichlids are the same. Tetra, people don't worry about breeding tetra and stuff like that. But loricariidae, it is just a patience game and just waiting for them to mature. And they mature at different rates. The common bristlenose is around 1 year old, whereas hypensistrus around 3, and then some larger ones about 4 or 5. Panax, I think could be 4 or 5. It's just they have an awfully stunted growth rate in captivity, mostly because people only feed them on wood or expect them to only eat that sort of thing, or they don't feed large species enough, I think, is the problem. Because the larger the fish, the more it needs feeding. But time, I think, is just waiting for them to grow and putting the patience into them growing and feeding them enough. And I think the other issue of time, it doesn't take long for freshwater aquariums can crash. And when they crash, it can be quite quick. And that amount of time is just waiting almost for another crash, I feel like.
Yeah. I think you're right about the patience. And I think there's a lot of people I'm going to set up a tank and I'm going to reproduce XXL number, whatever it is, and then a year and a half, 2 years down the track, they get bored. It's not doing anything, and away they go. And I don't know how many stories I've heard of people selling a group of something or other, and then 6 months later or 3 months later, they've spawned for the new owners, whether it was the shock of moving or they were just about coming into maturity and people got impatient. That happens quite regularly as well.
Yeah, I've noticed also a lot of F1s breed earlier than wilds, in some species anyway. So parasitic around here, because you see those beautiful sort of blocky goldfish. The F1s breed at, I've seen them half the size of the wilds. Wow. And a lot of people will buy these expensive ones that they might not have even just come out. Like snow whites have been around ages, and they were quite cheap. But then people are like, "Oh my god, this is something I can make money out of." They take a while to mature. It's not like a guppy which will breed and mature quite quickly. You're going to wait, and then you're waiting for someone else to breed them at prolific numbers that the price will crash. And Parancistris of Antiochus, they breed so prolifically that stores were originally charging, I think, £300, £400 an individual. And you can buy them a lot less now. And they're still getting them in for that price. It doesn't help that the AF of Antiochus, there is an L number or an LDA number I should use because it helps to find the difference. But they also probably have helped with the crash in prices because people buy it and they're like, oh, my fish will turn gold. And they're not as easy to turn gold as the other one. But there is a lot of that sort of economics of they will, by the time they're breedable, the price is gone.
Yeah, I think we're here in New Zealand about to experience that with Starlight Bristlenose. They're quite rare for a while. I think they got imported again, got pushed around. The first 2 or 3 generations of spawnings happened, and I think there's people sitting on a few that are just waiting for them to go. But there's going to be a lot of people that are in the same situation. I think they'll become as cheap as your standard Bristlenose fairly soon, or not much more.
I think I don't know. I think it's sometimes a bit good in a way. Like, it's nice to make it more economical for the right people, because sometimes the right people can't spend. The people that will look after the animal, do good by the animal, can't spend £400 on.
Yeah.
It depends on the situation. There's a whole lot more to it. And some people will save and still, like, a lot of people will save and look after the animal. But then you get people that only buy things because of that high price tag. And I've seen it with a lot of Plecos because they are a collector group. And people spend hundreds on these things and then they die. And
I know. It's a strange one. What about the common Pleco? Now, they've been around for years and years, but do you think they actually belong in the hobby because of the size that they tend to get to? So a lot of people do think it's wrong to have them in aquariums. Personally, I think if you've got the right setup, then it's not that bad. But what's your opinion on them?
I really like them. I don't know. I kind of, because on a lot of Facebook groups, loads of people, they don't put their effort into identifying them. And for some reason, I spent too long working out the difference between them. And I have a real appreciation for them. And the different species, some of them are really striking, really beautiful. The big thing for me is not just the size, because I don't think the size is entirely a worry for me. They are large, well-ish. There's larger and smaller. So they range from around 20 centimetres now, because you've got Pterophycles weberi, the Ranger Pleco, all the way to 45 centimetres, and that's standard length, so excluding the tail. But then people rage on about Pseudocanthicus, which gets bigger. Pseudocanthicus ranges from 30 centimetres, I'll exclude the L97, that's only a little bit smaller. From 30 centimetres, then they got a longer tail, all the way to, 60 centimetres. And people will spend hundreds on them, never say any issue about them. And then Panax, that's sort of a minimum of 30 centimetres of Panax bathyphyllus, not that you ever really see it in the trade. Often you get Shafari, which is really bad to be selling as something. It's because a lot of importers will list them as the same with a different letter. But when they come in, they do look a little bit different, but it can be a little bit hard to tell. But Panax Shafari gets the 60 centimetre standard length. Panax a lot worse, given that the average ones, excluded bathyphyllus, 40 centimetres to 60 centimetre standard length, and a whole lot more waist. Scopian and Cistrus again, 30 centimetres plus. And then people are raging over Acanthicus, which is 1 metre standard length. So I have no issue with Teoplectes. I do think there are some stunning. There's a lot of stunning ones. There's many that are rarer than zebra plecos in any country, rarer than L255, the spotted medusa, rarer than anything you can find. You just can't. You won't be able to get in this. Teoplectes literatus. I think I've seen 3 individuals I can definitely say in the aquarium trade were that. I've seen them on import lists. But I don't think anyone's going to be importing them. They do get, I think that's the 40 centimetre, and I think part of it's the price tag. They are too cheap. And some of them, if they were more expensive or if there was more value put on them, they would be as popular and as regarded as something that you do need a bigger aquarium for, something that is not a waste of keeping, like Gibiceps or Gibiceps. That is a really beautiful species.
They are stunning.
Yeah. But people don't put value on it. And it is worth, and Ambrosetti, the Snow King, that is one I rarely see. Or rarely see any that I can confirm that of it. And not all are that brightly coloured as the Snow King. But they are brilliant fishes. They're hardy, they're colourful. It's just not fair to put so many issues on them just because they are adaptable. They do get bigger, but there's bigger that will cause more issues probably in most tanks. Pseudacanthicus are really boisterous, as are acanthicus. Whereas Teoplectes are a lot more chill, a lot more hardy. Hence why you see them reach obscene, well, not even obscene ages. They deal with a lot of issues. Like I've seen one that was, I've got a photo of it, 30 centimetres, and it was kept in a 200-litre tank for 15 years. So they are nice fish. They just need more value put on them. And I think they need to be sold. I would rather not see the baby sold in stores without a warning. But I would say the same for Pseudacanthicus, Gobinensis, just any of the large ones, Panax. So I've seen people with 200 litres. Like, I cannot put a Panac in here. I've got Panaculus, but only one. Well, 2 at the moment. 3 at the moment because those are going to university. But Panac just gets gigantic. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
while you were talking, I was having massive connection issues, so I've only picked up on bits and pieces through that. So I'm going to have to rewatch that once we're done. I'm sorry I didn't pick up pretty much any of that, unfortunately.
Here's the coffee, Cam.
Sorry?
Here's your coffee.
It's here, but I've got stupid internet, and it was not a very good couple of minutes for me, but it doesn't sound like anyone else is having issues, so that's the main thing. So I'll just catch up on that one later on this evening or this afternoon. So we've had a question from the floor. How often do you think you need to specifically feed catfish in an established tank?
So for plecos, I'd feed daily. Depends on the size as well. The larger ones I might feed more, and depends on the size of the food and what they're eating. So the true carnivores, I might feed a bit less. So daily, and then the herbivores, I'd feed a lot more. Also seasonally, if I'm going to vary the temperature.
Yep.
Catfish in general, depends on the catfish. I would say generally carnivores, like true carnivores, I'd feed a lot less. It's more think about in the wild, if they're grazing, they're going to be grazing constantly like a cow, like a sheep, like a horse, like a rabbit, like a guinea pig. They're going to be constantly eating. They want something going through their gut all the time. Whereas carnivores are going to be foraging, looking for things. And it does depend on what sort of level they're doing at. Like Corydoras and some of the other Loricariidae, the Plecos, the ones that deal with the substrate, they probably would be feeding a lot more. And it's really think about what we define as a carnivore, or as an omnivore, as a herbivore, because we think of meat, plant, middle, whereas in the aquatic sense, it's so much more diverse because microbes come up under a lot more categories, especially when we're thinking about like bryozoa, protozoa. Bryozoa are like little animals, they're like little fans. Protozoa are just a mixture of different things. And then even algae. So there's so much more diversity to it. So it's really looking at what they eat. If it's something small, they're probably eating a lot more frequently than if they're eating insect larvae. It's really difficult because I do wish there was a lot more resources on fish diets rather than just saying carnivore, herbivore, omnivore, because it's really vague and it only, like, a lot of people take it on the mammalian sense, which is still quite diverse but very different, just how freshwater ecosystems or aquatic ecosystems work.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that the reason you're feeding the carnivore less is because they're not finding carnivorous stuff 24/7, where the herbivoric stuff is more likely to be grabbing on a real regular basis. Is that the kind of
I think so. And also, there's sort of levels of, it's really difficult with aquatic sense regarding nutrition, because algae are really high in protein, hence why it's very difficult to argue that low protein means herbivore, because algae have a lot of nutrition, hence why they're superfood. People drink spirulina. But there is that sense of it as well, but also like proteins, fats, also what they're eating, so whether they can digest it as well. It's quite interesting to see a paper mentioned earlier. It was mostly focused on whether you should feed bloodworm to killifish, but had a lot of good points that you could research further. And one of it was particularly looking at fish, and it said that a lot of fishes we keep don't eat fish in the wild. And that means that a lot of what they're adapted for, not just body shape, their gut, their microbes, they're not actually adapted for accessing or breaking apart fish. And they can't actually access the phosphorus and calcium from the bone so much. But then also there's, I've been trying to look at B12 values, which anyone that has looked into veganism or thought about veganism for either side of it always knows about B12. And insects are really low on B12 unless they're fed an addition of it. And then also algae contain a pseudo B12, which isn't any use, but fish use it as well. So there's so many aspects to diet, I think, that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of feeding, commercial food in the industry and the hobby, I know if we're feeding different sorts of fish, we're looking for different things in it. A, what are you looking for in the food that you're buying off the shelf to feed your fish? And B, what do you kind of rate to be some of the better stuff to be feeding our number fish?
So I go straight to ingredients. So I look at the back and I totally ignore percentages, because I think it's so unhelpful. With any diet, you're not looking at percentages because there's so much more to it. Like proteins, there's so many different types of proteins. They're precise different things. So algae, bacteria tend to produce very niche ones compared to other organisms, and animals, I think, produce their own. Sugars as well. So I don't look at those values. I look at ingredients, and what I try to do is, before I get a fish or think about a fish, I tend to actually look at what they feed on in the wild and try and match that as closely, or kind of build a picture. So some of it's quite vague, like detritus is just like waste products or breaking down things. It's really vague. So I kind of look at other values and compare it. So for Loricariidae, if they're mostly eating, which most of them do, algae and similar things to that. Also microbes and microorganisms which are really hard to define, I tend to go for those algae and stuff like that anyway, because actually there's so much when we think about actually buying the ingredients, there's so much that's going to be so difficult to get, but I kind of go just what's closest in their diet. Hence why I use Vipashi just for ingredients wise. They replicate the wild diet best, and I have emailed them about it because I was like, I want diets that are more precise to these individual fish, and I want more diets for the different types of because there's ones that feed mostly on mollusks, and there's ones that feed mostly on insects. Most feed mostly on algae, but different types of algae. Then there's a lot that feed on sponges. Sponges grow really slowly. I think it's like millimeter a year or something, a lot slower probably. So they're going to be almost impossible to replicate. And some people have managed to grow them in the aquarium, which I'm really jealous of. But it's like I kind of match as much as I can. So with Vipashi, I generally do so there's Soylent Green and Super Green, which are the more algivore and tritivore diets, I technically say. Super Green, if possible, where they're feeding on a lot more on algae, so that would be more like Ketostoma, Decicera, which is butterfly pleco, the actual Loricariidae pleco called butterfly pleco rather than the loach, but they probably would be fine on the same diet anyway.
168.052, those ones?
Yeah, Decicera picta. I know the scientific name, the L number, just because there's two and they got put into the same species as well.
Yeah, I believe they're classified as the same fish now, haven't they?
Yes.
Yeah. Off topic. So.
Makes it easier anyway because they both looked pretty similar anyway.
Yeah.
So they're more towards Super Green, Soylent Green, which has a little bit more other aspects to it. I'd feed on ones that potentially would eat more omnivorous, carnivorous parts of their diet. Not carnivorous as in they're omnivores, but it might come along in their diet. Because as they're grazing, they might pick up a lot more on it's really difficult to define, but sort of not just bacteria, but those protozoa, small animals that people don't really think of as animals. So I generally use those two because I keep more algivorous species or periplanktivores. Mm-hmm. So there are a few omnivores. And it's really difficult because I'm dealing with a genus almost at a time or genera at a time. I'm looking as far as I can into what I can find of their diets. And there's only a few omnivores or ones I can say are omnivores. And for me to say they're an omnivore, it means they're pretty much 50-50. And I think one is definitely a Phannotorulus, which is the thresher pleco, or there's the original name, Squaliforma. They, I think, are true omnivores because they feed on not just detritus, but also algae and a lot of insect protein. Mm-hmm. Regarding detritivores and algivores, so on Soylent Green, I'd also put Panac and Panacus in there. So feeding them rather than morning wood because they can't digest cellulose. So I don't see it's fine to feed it, but they can't digest it. So it's a whole other thing that if you want to feed it, you can, but that ingredient's going in one way, out the other.
You're right.
The same as some brands contain potatoes and peas. That's probably where those are going, which really bugs me when one says has no fillers, but they contain potatoes and peas. And I'm like, that's going in one way, out the other. So it's a filler. And then the true carnivores, there's not actually many. And I see lists saying this is a carnivore. And almost everyone I have to then cross off, because I'm also doing like studies on feeding behavior, and I want a range of different ones that feed across different diets. And I'm like, oh, this one might be a bit cheaper for me to obtain or easier to obtain as a carnivore. And then look at its diet in the wild, and I'm like, oh, cross that one off then. And it's just then Pseudocanthicus and Scobidensis and Leprocanthicus for now, which are quite big. I think there's a few other Loricariidae, even Pseudohemiodon, which is the chameleon Pleco, that little substrate, big substrate feeder that mostly feeds on algae and detritus, which is not helpful. But they were pricey anyway, so there's no way I could put them on my list for studies, because I need like 13 specimens.
Have you thought about, once you've finished your studies, have you thought about creating your own fish food range?
I've got a whole bag of ingredients that I was meant to. So I posted something on Facebook ages ago, because I've always been considering it. There's so much more to it though.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking more at the moment like supplements. So you could feed a base diet and that's got X, Y, Z, and then this is on top. The only issue is also the price of the ingredients. Some of mine are actually out of date, so I'd need to replace them anyway. But at the moment, the cost of keeping animals, it feels really difficult to be like selling anything that, and it is quite pricey at the moment, just electricity, and people are decreasing the amount of tanks. And it's kind of, so I would, but I don't know. Or I might try and see whether anyone teaming up with people if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
That might be an option. Bringing a recipe to somebody and saying, "Hey, let's work on this together," sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's why I contacted Rapashi, because I was like, "You make it. I don't want to. Yeah. I'd rather you make it than me, because you know more. Because I'm not interested in making money out of it. Anything. It's just I'd rather see the animals be fed well, live longer."
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. What else we got here? What's the best advice you got for someone who have never kept plecos but would like to?
So I would probably go with, I would research, I'd definitely look into like planet catfish, seriously fish, Scott cat, and also so Scott's cat. So that's I forget his name, but he has his own website and it's got really useful care guides. He knows a lot about different catfish, and different people have actually written for that website, that very well-known people. Mm-hmm. And it updates all the time. But researching them, think about what you want, and they are quite niche fish. So think about how you want to build your tank, whether you want to keep. I would advise think about, if it's plecos you really want, then thinking about what ones you want and building around that. Because the biggest issues I find is where people get them as an accessory, and then they're keeping them with fish that feed too fast, so that fish ends up starving to death, which I've seen a lot, especially with very fast feeding cichlids, loaches, barbs, stuff like that. So it's really, I think it's the same for a lot of fishes. Think of what you really want and building off of that. And there's so many different species. Some might take a little bit more to find. And obviously some countries are easier to find them than others. And sometimes just waiting. No, because it's such a seasonal sort of group of fishes that some fish, they'd be £5 one day. You won't see them for 20 years, and then there'd be £300. Then the next 5 years there'd be like £3 or something. It's just, sometimes it's just waiting, and they do appear.
Yeah.
So it's just thinking about the setup.
Yeah, we're a little bit more limited here. They might be available overseas, but we've got a white list basically. If it's not on the list, we can't bring them in anyway. So we are very limited when it comes to them. We still have a decent range, but we are pretty limited when it comes to L number fish, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they do come very seasonally on wholesale lists. As fast as they're on, sometimes as fast as they're off.
Hopefully there's sort of a range of species, because there is quite, like, you got the small hyperpatomenae like Otocinclus. Rhinotocinclus, I assume they're probably not on your white list. But a lot of the smaller species, they do quite well in sort of lower flow setups. I think they're quite adaptable. They are a bit more funny on diet, but they're something that you probably will see more actively. Then you got the more cooler water species like Chaetostoma. And given how I've seen on wholesalers, they just literally probably fish them out and won't identify one of them, and you get all sorts. I've seen Ancistrus come in on that with Chaetostoma, like small, because not all Ancistrus have tentacles on the head. Some do have none, and that's why I saw one of them. I was like, I'm tempted, but space. And then there's such a range, and even if you've got a large tank and you want a boisterous species, there are like Pseudocanthicus and Scopian Ancistrus, but I don't know what's on the white list, so I can't.
Yeah. None of them from memory.
Oh.
Is there a lot of names you've said today? Yep. No, we can't have them. No, we can't have them. Oh, no, we can't have them either.
Do you have, Cam, do you have any known catfish specialists or names that are like an authority on the topic in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we had Jeff on earlier. He is a world-renowned Pleco breeder.
Right.
So he's also the importer and distributor of Rapace over here. He's published many things on planet catfish from memory, as well as breeding logs and all that kind of stuff. He's well known, being over to the L number conventions and had done talks and that sort of thing.
Okay.
There's also another guy in Wellington who is pretty well up there when it comes to spawning various species of L numbers. And I think there's another guy down south that carries a few. So there's two or maybe three that I can definitely think of off the top of my head that are, at least in New Zealand, pretty prolific at keeping, and that's all they deal with is the L numbers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Over here, where I stay in Scotland, on to my left, I've got Pleco Planet, or Planet Catfish, sorry.
Cool.
And on the other side of the country is Scott Cat, so I'm in between the two of them.
Nice.
And Scott Cat visits the Catfish Study Group convention.
Yeah. And
he's there every year.
I hosted the Catfish Study Group as well one time. So I had them all together. That was good.
Yeah, we've got our convention at the
Might
end
have
of
to
the
get
month.
you
Sorry, Cam?
might have to get you asking some questions to a few people there, John.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Cameron's made a pretty good point here about the cleaner fish. I agree, it's quite a harmful terminology that they get used for, or the window cleaners, or whatever you want to call them. So what's your sort of opinion on that, Rebecca?
None of them have ever cleaned my tanks. My tanks are just, because these setups are a lot. Well, I don't clean the glass. I don't even clean off the water stains half the time because I don't see the point. But like when I've worked with in aquarium stores, I stocked a lot of different L numbers or other meant to be algae eaters, and that they were filthy, those tanks. Like literally, you'd clean it one day and you'd start to see the green film. The next day would be completely, and some of the tanks were really bad, especially for some biofilms. I think I did put some of it under microscope, and it was a few different like microbes, like filter feeders. The Panax were the worst. My soft water system was the worst because this whole store had no mechanical filtration. So it was filter feeder galore. Within a day, you'd get that, and then the algae. Apart from the discus system, wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I definitely don't think they're they should be considered a cleaner fish, and I think they need their own. Like you said before, if you're looking at getting into them, build your tank on them, not just have them as your addition. They are their own specialist group of fish that need their own care and attention put into them, for sure.
100%.
They live too long as well. It's not worth having a fish that lives longer than a dog or a cat, possibly longer than a horse. And it's just for cleaning your tank. You can have that tank for ages. And the problem is that tanks might not last 20, 25, 30 years. Silicone only lasts so long.
Yeah, very true.
And then you've got another tank, which is more costs. So you probably like, it's the same with like other animals. They live a long time. It's a big consideration. Reptiles as well are in a similar boat.
Yeah. Are you aware of any diseases that are more prone to getting or attacking our number fish, or is that just any sort of disease or parasites are pretty much the same with them?
I would say I don't really notice any particular. There's the xanthism, whatever it is. I say it's a disease because I think it's viral. Not everyone does. That's the one where they go gold, and then they might swing back. They might go to and from. I think it's a virus like you see with plants where they get a virus and it causes coloration changes. It's harmless generally. I've seen it kill in corridors, but I don't think it can transfer between the two. I'll say it's a disease because it is something different, and in the wild, the deep water species, they naturally go or lose their coloration. And also ones that live in the dark, but these ones, it's not great in the wild, but maybe in captivity they'll be fine. But they will be fine. That's one of the ones that I'm seeing more and more. I'm noticing it more and more. Worms, I don't know, because a lot of the time it's difficult to say when people aren't feeding enough. The fish are out competing, or they're not feeding the right food. Or sometimes they post a photo of a dead fish and decay makes everything just look totally different. A lot of other diseases, I would say they do have their own set of diseases. Like I've seen some weird tumor things on them that then go away. Herpes viruses, I think it's the herpes virus. It might not be because catfish just can't get lymphocytis, and it's the next similar thing. There's also a few bacteria that look the same. It comes and goes, and a lot of people, I can't follow up to ask, is it still there? Has it come back? Because I don't know, but it's probably so I think that's probably one of the more common ones. But a lot of animals do have their own set of viruses that do cause growth, and it could have a benefit on the immune system. I've seen because I was reading about it. But I don't see any particular dietary issues with starvation and malnutrition seem the biggest. And maybe we're not seeing half of the diseases they can get because they're just not living long enough in captivity.
Yeah. Could possibly also, because they're quite reclusive and nocturnal in a sense, you might see one day and not see it for another couple of weeks. And in that time, a lot of things have changed as well. Plenty of people say, I've got one of these. In fact, there was one in the chat earlier. I've got one of these. I've seen it like 3 times in the last 3 years I've had it. But you still know it's there sort of thing. So, yeah. Yeah,
and some people don't even know if it's died or not as well, because they've not seen it.
Yeah.
And I've done that with some of my fish where I've had to rummage through the tank and oh, you're still there.
Yeah.
Coolie roaches are bad for that.
Coolie roaches are really bad for that.
Yeah, they're brilliant. I want to keep them again. I had a group of, I think they were my sea mostly. I did have Cunia variegata, which is the really tiny ones, and that got in my external filter. And then I fished out, put it back in. But I had quite a good group, and then they got I think it could have been like a Colmenaris or something, but they'd get massive lesions, and then also at the same time they'd get fluid and bubbles in their intestines. So, and that was, I don't have any more since then, and that's been quite a few years. But they're brilliant fish, and feeding them when you see them all come out to the front, or
they're great.
you lift something up and they're there.
Yeah. I've got a group of neon ones that I've had for quite a while now, and they remain quite narrow compared to some, and they're longer as well. So when they do that thing that they do, it's really intense. It's like spaghetti. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a bit grotesque in a way, but like I've got my half-banded spiny eel, Macrogonatha circumcintus. I think that could be a male. That one was originally owned by someone else before I took him on. So I don't know how old he is, but he's quite friendly. There's a female or just a very round one in here. But
I've been watching your tank the whole time, and I've been meaning to ask if it was is it a fire eel or some sort of.
No, he won't get any bigger. He's the type. He just sits at the front and follows whatever. And he's no bother to. This is my male Stenkadiscus. I do want to get a female because I think if I get a shoal, they're going to pair off anyway. And I can't have a pair in there and a pair in there, but where do I put the shoal? So he's no bother. And this is my male platy colony because I spent a good long while separating all the males out from the females.
I've also been enjoying watching them swim back and forth.
They're much more boisterous than the females. I find like the females are really chilled. And they just swim around, whereas the males will just chase each other. So I think it's quite interesting, like, if people want different personalities out of platies, but the only issue is if you get females, they're going to probably be pregnant. And it's been a good few months, and I don't think there's any more out of my females. The discus have had a snap at them, at the babies, but they've not caught any yet, I don't think.
Are there any salty or brackish L number fish about? Do you know?
So Pteroplectes, the common Pleco, potentially they can survive brackish water. There is long-term potential issues. There's a paper on it, or there's a few actually. So they can acclimatise to it, but long-term it's a bit unknown. Not the other species, no. They're generally soft water. Catfishes, there's a lot more. There's the sea catfishes, so Aridae. There's also, they're now illegal in the UK. I don't know the common name, but Plotosus lineatus, which was like a striped catfish, very attractive as juveniles. They're like little eel catfish with stripes. And they were cold water marine species. They could put you in a hospital if you got envenenated by one, but they were legal. I doubt they're legal in New Zealand because they can survive quite cool waters. The adults look nothing alike. Aridae, obviously, there's ones that travel between the two. So that's like Columbian shark, which is Ariopsis, I think. And that can travel between the two. There's also out of the banjo catfishes. There's the Platystachys cotylophorus that can live in mild marine, I'll say. They travel between the two, and they can travel between river systems. So it's very short term. And that's why I don't keep them anymore, because I think that's the key to breeding them, because all of mine got egg bound.
Okay.
So... And I only ever had them in freshwater, and I don't think I've seen other people get theirs to develop eggs, but that's as far as it gets. And they're ones that a lot of the banjos, they have eggs that they dangle from their body,
right?
Which is why they're called Platystachys cotylophorus, because the cotylophore is that little string they dangle their eggs from.
Ah, right.
Cool.
which some get imported like that. If you're lucky, you might find one that's imported with the eggs attached.
Definitely a species that's not here. Can assure you that. We're pretty much about to run out of time. I've got to go and open up the shop in a few minutes' time. So, as I'm sure you're aware, I like to finish off these weird reviews with basically a quick bunch of 6 questions. This quick score of 6. So my first question for you is, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I don't know. Talking to animals is cool, I think. Be able to communicate with them.
That's good, because I'm going to lead that into my next question, is if animals could talk, which one do you think would be the dirtiest?
Sorry?
If animals could talk, which one do you think would be the most dirty-minded or dirtiest?
I don't know. I'd say dogs, but also guinea pigs are pretty bad, given I've got 6 of them, and the males are castrated. They still try on the 2 ladies each of them are with.
If you're doing a coin toss, do you call heads or tails?
Tails.
Tails, because tails never fails.
Exactly.
If you could have a meal with absolutely anybody, alive, dead, or fictional, who would it be?
Alfred Russel Wallace is one of the creators of evolution, or founders of evolution.
Cool. Awesome. Are we alone in the universe?
Probably not. Not that many of the other things out there probably that exciting. It's probably all bacteria-like and virus-like.
And the last one of the 6 is, what is your unicorn fish? And you can use this in either one that you would like to keep, study, swim with, catch in the wild, anything along those lines.
Ancestral Ranunculus is my favourite.
Your favourite?
The true Medusa. I've got a statue of one. I've got them. They're my favourite. And they're my background on every computer. Yeah.
They are absolutely creepy and hideous in my eyes. In most people's eyes, I think. That's all I've got. So thank you very much for joining us. It's really appreciated. It's been fantastic. I know there's a lot of people that have enjoyed what you've brought to us in the chat, and the people that have watched it. So I really do appreciate your time. It's been fantastic. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's also worth noting that this has been our longest live stream ever.
Yeah, it'll be up there.
Servers.
Yeah. So, if you haven't already, don't forget to do that subscribe thing and join and share and like and all that kind of jazz. Yay. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much everybody that watched. If you've got any more questions, please feel free to fire them away, and we'll try and get them through to Rebecca and see what she can help you with that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Have a good
one, guys. Catch you later. Thank you.
Bye.